War crimes or national security? The controversial U.S. drug vessel strikes under fire. What began as a crackdown on narcotics trafficking has morphed, within the span of months, into a lethal campaign across international waters. One that has left dozens dead, stirred global outrage, and prompted serious questions about legality and morality. Since September 2025, the U.S. military has carried out a series of strikes on vessels it claims were run by drug trafficking groups. The operation, dubbed Operation Southern Spear, was publicly pitched as a necessary escalation to protect Americans from the ravages of illicit drugs. But as reports emerge of survivors targeted in follow-up strikes, and as international institutions condemn the campaign as basically murder, the world is forced to ask, has America crossed the line from law enforcement into outright war crimes? This video explores the controversial strikes, their justification, the backlash, and what America risks losing if unchecked force becomes the default. From interdiction to missiles, the escalation of tactics. Traditionally, U.S. drug interdiction efforts involved surveillance, interception, boarding, and arrest, tools considered lawful under international maritime norms. What changed in 2025 was the decision to use missiles and lethal force against suspected smuggling boats. The first known strike on September 2nd destroyed a boat off Venezuela, killing 11 people. In the months since, at least 20 separate operations have been publicly reported in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, with more than 80 fatalities. The scale and frequency of these strikes suggest a shift from targeted law enforcement actions to what increasingly resembles a maritime battlefield. Top U.S. officials, including Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, have defended the escalation as necessary to stem narco-terror threats and to protect American lives. Yet critics warn that once the tools of war are used outside formal conflict zones, the boundaries of acceptable conduct can quickly erode. Legal storm clouds, war crimes versus counter-narcotics. The heart of the controversy surrounds legality. International law distinguishes between law enforcement and armed conflict. Most legal experts argue that using lethal force against unarmed smugglers, especially without offering a chance for surrender, violates both U.S. commitments and universally accepted norms. The United Nations Human Rights Council, via its High Commissioner, publicly declared the strikes unacceptable, urging immediate cessation and independent investigation. Even within U.S. legal circles, questions abound. Following a strike that reportedly hit survivors clinging to wreckage, hardline orders, allegedly "kill them all," were issued, per reporting by The Washington Post. If verified, these could qualify as extrajudicial executions, not counter-narcotics operations. That is the danger. By conflating drug trafficking with war, the administration risks normalizing methods that undermine basic legal protections and due process under both international and domestic law. Human cost: who bears the casualty toll? According to the publicly available data, the death toll from the strikes is not small, at least 80 and likely more, and includes individuals whose identities remain unconfirmed. This raises haunting questions. How many were definitively cartel operatives, and how many were fishermen, migrants, or otherwise innocent civilians? Families of victims have already begun reaching out to international human rights institutions. In one recent case, relatives of a Colombian fisherman killed in a strike filed a complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, alleging extrajudicial killing. If confirmation, documentation, and legal review remain opaque or never come, these deaths will stand as blood spilled in the name of narcotics enforcement, not battlefield victories. Either way, each life lost chips away at America's moral authority, domestically and abroad. Diplomatic fallout, allies, adversaries, and international law. The strikes have reverberated beyond U.S. borders. Latin American nations, including long-standing partners, are alarmed by what they view as American overreach. Suddenly, U.S. claims to uphold democratic norms and human rights, a pillar of its global influence, are under serious challenge. Moreover, global institutions are pressing back. The UN condemnation represents not just moral concern, but a demand for accountability, transparency, and adherence to international law. As these actions escalate, American soft power might decline, particularly in regions where U.S. intervention has already been a sore spot. If Washington continues to strike without transparent evidence or judicial oversight, it risks alienating allies and undermining its standing as a global champion of human rights. Domestic politics, Congress, courts, and the torch of oversight. Inside the United States, the strike campaign has ignited fierce debate. Some lawmakers demand full disclosure, evidence for the strikes, video footage, names of those killed, and legal justification. Others fear creeping militarization of domestic policy. Critically, the strikes were launched without new congressional authorization. The administration argues existing counter-terror and national defense powers are sufficient. But many constitutional scholars and civil liberties watchdogs disagree. They warn that using lethal force far from any declared conflict zone without due process raises serious separation of powers and civil rights concerns. The coming months may determine whether U.S. oversight institutions, Congress, courts, media, reclaim authority over foreign policy militarization, or whether the executive's new mode of narco-warfare becomes normalized. The strategic gamble. Will it work? Proponents of the strikes argue they will choke cartel supply lines, reduce drug availability in the U.S., save lives, and send a deterrent message. In a surface-level accounting, there is logic. Fewer boats, less drugs, fewer overdoses. But experts warn of long-term blowback. Smuggling operations historically adapt quickly. When one route is blocked, others emerge. Cartels may shift to land routes, use more covert methods, or accelerate production to offset losses. The result could be more dangerous smuggling, more violence, not less. Moreover, collateral damage, deaths, regional instability, diplomatic rupture may outweigh any temporary disruption to cartels. What looks like a strategic win could end up as a destabilizing, costly mess for the U.S. and its neighbors. What history reminds us: precedents, mistakes, and the price of expedience. History offers harsh lessons. Past U.S. interventions in Latin America, the Middle East, other regions often started with high moral rhetoric, but ended in blowback, regional instability, distrust, and tragedy. Extrajudicial killings, covert operations, and disregarded sovereignty seldom produce clean victories. If the U.S. continues down this path, it risks repeating those mistakes, but on a far broader scale. The drugs trade may be warlike, but it isn't a war. Treating it as such abandons centuries of legal and moral frameworks built to protect human life, even when confronting criminals. What America gains in short-term disruption, it may lose in long-term stability, respect, and global leadership. The war on drugs is as old as America's own history, but never before has it been pursued with missile strikes on open seas without charge or trial. What the U.S. now faces is a moment of decision: continue down a path of extrajudicial force, or reinstate a rule of law approach grounded in evidence, transparency, and human rights. If we choose the former, justice and accountability are casualties. We grant permission to cross lines once thought taboo. We undermine our own standing in the world and surrender the moral high ground to convenience. If we choose the latter, restraint, oversight, lawful process, we affirm that America remains a nation of laws, not of impulses, that we value human life and due process even when confronting heinous threats. This is more than a policy debate. It is a test of who we are, as a nation, a global leader, and a people committed to justice. The lives lost at sea deserve answers. The world deserves transparency, and America deserves better than vengeance masquerading as justice.